Okay. Next up, we have Brendan Smith of Dalhousie University. He's going to describe the subtle sounds of hydrothermal vents and what they can tell us about the environment. So we're looking forward to learning more, Brendan.
Thank you. Yeah, so today I'll be talking a little bit about my PhD research on hydrothermal vent soundscapes. So kind of first of all, the obvious question, what is a hydrothermal vent? So this is a video from a remotely operated vehicle at one of these sites. These are features on the seafloor near tectonic plate boundaries in the ocean where seawater seeps in through cracks, mixes with subsurface water, gets superheated by subsurface magma, and then rises back up through these cracks laden with minerals, which gives it this dark black color that you see here. And when this vent fluid, which can be as much as 300 to 400 degrees Celsius, so extremely hot, mixes with the very cold seawater, some of these minerals precipitate out, forming these tall, solid chimney-like structures that you see here. And hydrothermal vents are important because they contribute not only to the heat and chemical budgets of the ocean, but also because there's some very uniquely adapted marine life that lives with these hostile environments. So why do we want to study their soundscape? Well, if we understand the sound produced by the vents themselves, we can use this for both finding new vent sites, but also for monitoring their activity over time. We can do this both here on Earth, but also potentially for future interplanetary exploration. For example, it's been suggested that some moons of Saturn and Jupiter might also have hydrothermal vents. If we understand the vent soundscape, we can potentially understand bioacoustic cues. So it's been suggested by others that some of the species that live at vents might migrate from one vent site to another, kind of using the acoustics as a signpost for where to choose to settle their habitat. And finally, we want to understand the soundscape so we can better predict the environmental impact of proposed industrial activity like deep sea mining, which has been proposed at hydrothermal vent sites. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about some of the potential sound sources from the vents themselves. I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of them include things like pipe resonance, which you'd expect from like an organ pipe due to the kind of tall tubular structures. But also because the vent fluid is so hot when it mixes with the cold seawater, that can also be a sound source. But these aren't the only things that make up the kind of total soundscape picture at the vents. We also have surface weather, anthropogenic sources like shipping and sonar, biological sources like whales and species of shrimp, crabs, and fish that have adapted to live at hydrothermal vents. And also because these are tectonic plate boundaries, we have a lot of earthquakes. And these all show up as kind of the holistic picture of the soundscape at these sites. So to kind of get a little bit more into this, we looked at 3 study sites. The first being the Endeavour vent field in the Pacific, the Lucky Strike hydrothermal field in the Atlantic, and Cascadia Basin, which is also in the Pacific but doesn't have any vents, so it's sort of our control location to compare the other sites to. In the Pacific, our data came from Ocean Networks Canada, and in the Atlantic, it was from the EMSO Observatory. So how do we listen to these signals? We use underwater microphones effectively, called hydrophones. Here you can see the Endeavour site with Ocean Network Canada's permanently cabled hydrophone, and this has recorded years of data at this point, as well as our lab's deep acoustic lander array. And this is multiple hydrophones that helps us discern the direction that the vent sound is coming from. So using that data, what we found, first of all, is that it's not obvious. From the video, you might expect that the vents are really obvious. They're kind of vigorously, venting, and that signal would be really apparent. Unfortunately for us, that's not the case. And so we have to be a little more subtle about how we get at that vent signature. So one feature that we've tried to exploit is that it's been shown that the vent flow rate and temperature can modulate with the tides because the overlying pressure changes as the tides pass the vent. And so here's just showing a weekly time series of bottom pressure, and you can see that the pressure varies once and twice a day. So we want to look for similar features in the acoustics. And we actually did find evidence of that. So at very low frequencies, we see once, twice, and 4 times daily peaks in the time series, which shows that there's variability on these tidal scales at these low frequencies. And these could be due to either flow from the vent or harmonic tremor, which is fluid traveling beneath the seafloor. And we also see evidence of tidal variability between about 100 and 500 hertz. Again, this could be due to the nearby vent. But we want to get at more the holistic picture of the soundscape, not just the vent, but also the other features. So we looked at how uniform the soundscape was over time, and also how impulsive it was. And we found at both the Endeavour and Lucky Strike sites that they were both less uniform and more impulsive than the non-vent site. And we believe this is due both to vent sources and seismic sources, but also to the local biology, so the shrimps and the crabs, which could produce, for example, snapping or tapping sounds, which would show up as impulsive sources at the vents. So this is something we want to look into further. Finally, we tried to correlate various environmental parameters with measures of the soundscape to try to discern better what was causing what we were seeing at the vents. So on the left, we're just comparing different environmental metrics with the sound pressure level and seeing how well those correlate. We see that the wind and waves are very well correlated, which is a well-known feature of sound in the ocean. But it's also interesting to note that the vent temperature is well correlated, which is promising to us as using acoustics for monitoring of hydrothermal vent activity. On the right, we see the impulsiveness, and as you can see, these are all very not well correlated with any of the environmental parameters, suggesting that there's another source that we didn't take into account here, which is responsible. Again, likely either seismic or vent sources, but also the biological signals, something we want to look at further. So in conclusion, the hydrothermal vent soundscapes, when compared with the non-vent soundscapes, were more impulsive and less uniform over time. The environmental variables we looked at didn't explain this, which suggests another source like biology, vent dynamics, or seismic sources. And particularly, we want to look further into the possible relationship between vent biology and the soundscape, as this would be important for environmental impact prediction. And I wanted to just acknowledge these people who supported this work. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, Brendan. That was great. So I'll kick us off with a question. I'm curious, what are the advantages to monitoring a hydrothermal vent with a hydrophone as opposed to with images or something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, as we can see from the Ocean Networks Canada hydrophone that's been there for years, one of the nice advantages is that you can be remote from the vent itself. This helps keep your instrument safe. So for example, people have used temperature probes in vents, but because of the high temperatures and caustic characteristics of the fluid, they tend to get destroyed. And so using acoustics, we can stay at a safe distance, potentially very far away because sound travels so efficiently in the ocean, and still monitor these over long time periods.
Okay, great. It looks like we have some audience questions too.
I'm curious what you define as impulse, because you were referring to snapping shrimp, but when they're all overlapping each other, it's a lot of millisecond impulses, right, that blend together and basically like bacon in a frying pan. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, if you're looking at those lower frequencies, if it might be the migrating blue pinwheels, because even though they have 20-second calls, they're very impulsive, right? And so when you're saying impulse, like what is that range of impulse that you guys look at?
Yeah, absolutely. And something I didn't show here just for sake of time was we actually looked at different frequency bands to look at how impulsive was the low frequency band below 100 hertz versus higher frequency bands. And so at low frequencies, we do see that impulsiveness, and I think that is due to the fin whale calls particularly, because we see those, especially during the winter months at Endeavour. But it was also very impulsive above 1 kilohertz, which would not probably be from either fin or blue whales. And those are what we think might be from like the local vent biology. Yeah.
You talked about how the sounds from this were tied to other sounds you found in the ocean, and how there was a lot of earthquake noise. I was curious if you could relate the two. Could you predict earthquakes or do anything like that based on the sounds that you see from the hydrothermal vents?
Yeah, so that's not something that I'm looking at personally, but I know that Ocean Networks Canada is actually doing some kind of earthquake monitoring. I'm not sure if they're using acoustics so much as they have bottom-mounted seismometers offshore, and they're using those signals to try to get at some earthquake prediction. But potentially acoustics could play a role in that, absolutely. Yeah.
Given the fact that you said that these chimneys can be modeled as organ pipes, I was sort of surprised that that your signal is so subtle kind of astonishing to see anything. So my question is, when you go into this research, what are you really trying to see? You know, what's the most striking feature that gives the most promise? You know, for listening into a chimney.
Yeah, so something that I'm looking into right now is we do see these very, very low frequency tonals on the order of 5 hertz. And those are tonal signals are more like what we'd expect from a tubular structure, for example, or like a Helmholtz resonator. And so that's what I'm hoping, because we can kind of track the frequency of that over time. And what we're hoping is that we can relate that very tonal signal to vent temperature or flow rate, and then use that to try to predict the temperature using the acoustic signal. So I think if we can get like a really strong tonal signal, that's our sort of best chance at the monitoring aspect.
Okay, well, thanks, Brendan, and we'll be back in one moment for our next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah.